What up? What up? Welcome back to the Leaders in Cyber podcast. I am your host, Eddie Thomason, and today we have an incredible guest that's going to be sharing her thoughts and tips and insights into the cybersecurity space. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I am very ecstatic to have Jax on the show today because she's added so much value to the cybersecurity space. And I think from everybody that I had on the show so far, the energy that she brings is very, very, very similar to the energy that I bring. So I think you guys are in store for a highly energetic episode, a conversation where two people are just going to be geeking out about this lovely thing called cyber. But I do want to give the guest the opportunity to introduce herself because I know she's doing a lot and I don't want to miss everything. So Jax, give the people a little bit of an idea of who you are and what you're excited about.
Absolutely, Eddie. And I'm ecstatic as well to be here. This is long overdue. I know we were trying to make this happen for a long time with our crazy schedule. So I'm really excited to be here, even on a gloomy day right now. So high level overview of what I do, Jax, in the cybersecurity space. So for all of the listeners who may not know me, how I broke into cybersecurity was actually through IT, through the military, doing help desk, infrastructure design. And then I actually wanted to get out of IT and I went into electronic warfare for a few years. And then the military had this genius idea that electronic warfare should fall under cybersecurity. I don't know why, but that's what they decided in 2014. And so I kind of got sucked back into this space at the time that I thought was still IT. The concept of cyber was still kind of maturing and emerging at that time. And I got placed in, due to my military background, working in special ops, doing a lot of intel work. I moved into, naturally, a space of cyber threat intel, where I really got I guess you could say that's where I kind of broke into the industry, into cybersecurity during a deployment that I had in 2019. And now kind of fast forward, I work in governance, risk, and compliance. I had my own firm for a while in this space. And then, as you know, Eddie, super passionate about giving back. So I have a podcast and I have a YouTube channel. And the YouTube's in collaboration with the company that I work for now, where I provide weekly episodes all around like the technology space. And it's an emphasis within cyber, but I do technology and innovation. And then I also do a highlight series for women. So big nerd, love what I do. I work primarily now today in governance, risk, and compliance, and I nerd out on federal policies.
I absolutely love it because I love the background, and I'm already glad that you shared your origin story because if you don't know already, I'm a huge Marvel fan. So I love hearing the origin stories of where people come from, how they got into this lovely space called cyber, right? And I know one of the things that you definitely brought up because you hit a lot of great things inside of there. I love that you have like a rap sheet, right? A rap sheet of different things that you love to do. Mm-hmm. But I will want to dive into this initial thought of like military, right? I want to learn about that career military. And one, why did you feel as though you needed to get out of IT, right? I'm just curious to know what that mindset was. Cause I know it sounds like you kind of got tossed back into it because you thought you were getting out and they just kind of sucked you back in. But why were you tired of it in the first place?
Yeah, it's so interesting because when people ask me if you could do anything different in your career, what would you do? And I'm like, I would go back to myself in 2008 and tell myself that there's more than help desk and SharePoint within IT because that's what I was doing. And it was miserable. And I always say, I think that everybody in the world should be a waiter, a waitress, or do help desk for a year because we would just be much more kinder individuals. And it taught me a lot. I quasi enjoyed service desk because at that time I did enjoy people. I just didn't like the treatment that you received being on service desk. And I honestly thought that was the world of IT. I thought that, that's all I knew. I was very young at the time. I was in my mid-20s. And that's why I wanted out of it. I'm like, this is terrible. This is my day-to-day job. I come in, if I'm not doing help desk, I'm building this thing called SharePoint, which at that time it was still in an infant stages of growth within the military. And it just wasn't where my expertise and talent lied at that time. So that was really the big reason, Eddie. And I did everything I could to not go back into the IT space. I changed my branch. I did everything. I just had no desire to play in that space.
So then, like you said, you came out of IT, you got into electronic warfare, right? Thinking like, hey, I'm never going to get back into the IT side, everything else, right? But I'm just curious, how did you leverage the things that you learned in IT and apply it to electronic warfare? Or is this something that you literally had to go back, reteach yourself everything from scratch and kind of start moving forward that way?
So the military at that time, it was around 2012, 2013. They were establishing a branch that had already been established in the Navy called electronic warfare, and in doing so, I had been reached out by a recruiter to become a what we call a warrant officer in the Army, and they had what they called at the time feeder MOSs to go into this branch, and there, in my opinion, there wasn't a lot of commonality between doing IT to doing electronic warfare. They even had pilots. Like one of the feeders were pilots. And so you had pilots inside of electronic warfare in the warrant specific fields because they needed people that had served in the military for a period of time, could go into the warrant program, and that had the aptitude to be able to succeed in this program because the attrition rate was really high. It was about within the first couple of weeks, you had these physics exams. So we would lose, it was upward of 80 to 90% of the class would be lost because of the physics portions of the exam. So there wasn't a lot that I per se took with me from that IT, that infrastructure background into electronic warfare, except for my willingness to learn, my aptitude for understanding kind of just the space. That's why I thought it was really humorous when we kind of created our own branch, and then the Army's like, oh yeah, no, we're going to stick you under cyber because that makes complete sense. Because just to give you like an understanding, and for anybody that doesn't know like what is electronic warfare, the very layman's terms of this is working on the electromagnetic spectrum. So the World War II, that was the first time that we started seeing it on the front lines of battle with using the planes they would drop different types of metal out of the planes to start skewing the radar systems. And I can't remember the exact name of that. I should remember, and somebody listening to this is going to be like, this is what it's called. But yeah, they would dump all of these medical particles, which would skew the radar system. And then we could, the individuals could then airborne in, and the radar couldn't tell if it's a plane, if it's individuals, what it was. So that's what electronic warfare was. It really doesn't have a lot to do with cyber except for the aspect of Wi-Fi. Like there's, or IoT devices. So you do have very little overlap, but the similarities are still vast in a lot of ways. But EW, electronic warfare, does fall under there's units or there's positions within cybercom that are electronic warfare on top of, IT as well. So it all kind of intertwines.
Right. And I love that you said that because this is a gem for everybody that's listening. You didn't pick up on this. Jax said that when she moved from the IT role and into this new role inside of electronic warfare, right? The biggest thing is that she had the willingness to learn is the biggest thing. And I think when you think about cybersecurity, that is a huge prerequisite, right? I don't think you're going to get hired in this space or you're going to transition successfully into this space if you don't have that natural curiosity to learn something new, right? Because no matter what you're doing, cybersecurity is such a broad space that you can be one of those guys that's like a jack of all trade and everything is very shallow in knowledge, or you could be one of those people that as you switch and transition and move into different roles, then you start to have a deeper understanding and a deeper knowledge of all the different things that's inside, say specifically network security or firewalls, things from that perspective, right? Like learning the specific pieces. So I'm glad that you brought that up, but I wanted to highlight that because I think for people listening, like they hear your story, but they don't hear the small piece of like, oh, this is really what made that transition very successful.
Yeah, both were very difficult career fields, branches, I guess. Going into IT was not easy. It was a very long school, and then electronic warfare was not easy. But yeah, you said it. Anybody that's wanting to get into this industry, you have to be willing to be challenged first off, and then never stop learning because this space is just ever changing, and you just have to stay on top of your game.
Absolutely. So now I do want to transition. I want to pivot a little bit because I want to talk about obviously the fact that you're a woman in tech, right? Like you're a woman in tech, women in cyber. You do a lot of great things to highlight some of the voices inside of this space, right? But I want to talk about what impact you felt as though just you being a woman and transition throughout your different careers within the military, and then obviously starting your own business, which is absolutely incredible. And then being even in the role that you're in today, what are some of the, the things that you felt as though were challenges as far as leading teams or leading people that may have not given you the respect that you needed along the way?
Yeah. For me, being a woman in this space, it was interesting going from the military, because I was in the special ops, very male dominated, A-type males on top of that. I was part of an all-woman program, special ops program. And in the SF, we have a saying that selection never ends. And even though as part of this program, I had been selected for it, you were still what we call in the special ops an enabler. So what that means is you're not one of the guys or gals that have gone through special forces selection and been given a green beret. And you're in a mindset, you're kind of less than those individuals, because they are what make up the force, where we enable them. They have bomb techs that come in that are enablers, civil affairs that are enablers, and I was an enabler. So that mindset, you have to work twice as hard to get half the credit, was always kind of in my forethought when I was in the special ops. I left there. I did my tour in 2019, my last active duty tour, came back and started working at FireEye at the time, now Mandiant. And I was very surprised and also a little disheartened at the fact that it wasn't too much of a shift with being a woman in tech, going from special ops and being a woman in cybersecurity. I also take in count, Eddie, it was the firm where I was working at, the culture where I was working, the role, cyber threat intel, like all of those things played a role in it. But it was disheartening at the fact that being a woman in tech was still a thing. You're still a woman. You still have to work twice as hard. You still have to do certain things, and you may not even get credit for it. The guy might get credit for it. Your team might get credit for it. But I will tell you that because of my military, I had a lot of resilience, and a lot of those things that were just kind of happening, I just considered it, oh, well, this is just kind of how it is. But I will say, through my journey and where I'm at today, if anybody's listening to this that has maybe you're experiencing that right now, my biggest encouragement to you is don't give up. There is a culture out there. I work and I breathe and in a culture today that I adore my team, and they actually love that I'm a woman, because I bring a different viewpoint. I bring a different perspective to my team. So it's not a thing anymore of where I work. So I think that for me, it was just going through that and then finding that culture in that team. And then once you find that and you're accepted into it, I mean, it was a complete game changer for me. But I know, and I'm not naive to the fact that there are still individuals that are still in those cultures and in those environments right now, that it's a thing that they're a woman. And they might have been hired because they were a woman to accomplish one of their, check the boxes. But yeah, and it is frustrating, but just remember, yes, you might have to work twice as hard to get half the credit, but it's not like that everywhere in this space. You just have to find the right culture.
Absolutely. I love to say all the time that anytime you're making transitions or shifting inside of the space, it's very important to take a full look at the culture of the company, right? And I love companies with the interview process that you don't just talk to, say, like your boss and then your boss's boss, and then you're offered a job, right? But more so, it's an opportunity to chat with all kinds of different people inside of the organization itself, right? And it's very similar to how we do it here at Data Locker, where like we have culture interviews where you talk with people who on a day-to-day, you might not talk to them a lot, but they're a part of the culture, right? They're a part of the company culture, and they do things differently, especially in like this hybrid workforce that we're in today, where you don't get to see everybody in person all the time. So I think that's very important. What you communicate is, yes, take into account the full culture, and don't be afraid. This is what I also say. Don't be afraid to shake things up. I feel like a lot of the times we get really stuck in comfort, right? Like we get stuck in our comfort zone. It's like, hey, this is where I am. And like you said, like you just expect this is just how it's going to be, right? But then as soon as you start kind of peeking over, and looking at different things, you can start to identify not necessarily that the grass is greener on the other side, but you can identify somebody or an organization that's going to value your input and value your thoughts on a much higher scale than maybe where you're currently planted, right?
100%.
And I love, here's what I want to talk about. The reason I mentioned all that is because you talked about the viewpoint that women bring to cybersecurity, right? And that's one of the things that I've talked with multiple guests on the show before, is this idea that we need people from all different backgrounds of life to transition into cyber, because that's how we understand, the different types of social engineering attacks, and how somebody else with like, maybe they come from a janitorial background, and what vulnerabilities now lie within just that sector of an organization, right? So I would love to hear from your perspective, Jax, the perspective, right? The viewpoint that women bring, and why is that so important to include that inside of this incredible space called cyber?
Yeah, and this is, so to answer that question, I'm going to tell a story because I
Absolutely.
love storytelling. Yeah. So when this program that I was a part of, it's called the Cultural Support Team Program. And the reason that it was created was, at the time, General McChrystal had realized that we had an intel gap within our intelligence within the Middle East. It was primarily focused on Special Operations Command. And they knew that the primary intel gap was associated with the women and children, an area that was untapped because the males, and due to the culture, were not able to talk to the women and children. So what he created and what he proposed was the Cultural Support Team Program to train up these women in the same training environment as the males go through in a shorter time period, and go out and enable these operators with knowing that we would go out there, work with the women and children, but we would bring a different perspective to the mission. And one of the biggest things that I saw working in this space, and I think has definitely, I utilize kind of the same mindset in the civilian world, is we bring, first and foremost, we bring empathy. Typically, you will see more empathy from a woman. You will see more understanding. We have a little bit more, and this is not all like all inclusive, not every woman, but generally you see like a woman can look at things at a broader viewpoint. I know that you hear that multitasking isn't the best thing to do, but women are very good at looking at multiple different things and taking on multiple different things. I mean, women raise children, they run a household, they work full time, and it's a different viewpoint. And I notice such an amazing impact working with the special ops. And I see it when teams are truly inclusive and they allow individuals with different, and not just women. Let's open this up even broader, and let's talk about different cultures, different beliefs. And we allow these people in, and we foster an environment of inclusion. And inclusion means respecting. We don't have to like each other's opinions, but respecting each other's opinions. We are more impactful in our space, in our specific field, across the board, period. And women are just one aspect of that.
Absolutely. I love that you brought that up, because it's so true. When you look at when anytime me and my wife go out to any event and things like that, right? And we're not forced to, but we get the opportunity to share like our differences, our backgrounds, and things like that. I tell people all the time, if you want a shoulder to cry on, you definitely want to talk to her. And it's not because I'm like just this hard nosed, like absolute, like just hard stone cold person, right? I would like to think that I still have a big soft heart, right? People call me a big teddy bear majority of the time, but like as far as somebody who just needs to vent, my wife is a much better option for you, because I'm going to try to find a solution and not just let you speak. I'm just going to like hear you and be like, hey, well, that was dumb. Go do this, and you'll win, right? Where like,
absolutely,
like Colleen is just so much more welcoming and like, hey, it's okay. Let's take you from like sad to neutral to then excited. I'm like, no, bro, we got to skip this neutral. You got to cut off this sad and go to excited, right? So it's very important that you have that empathy piece inside inside of an organization, right? Let's not just talk about cybersecurity in itself, but it's very important to have it in an organization because we are people, right? I think we lose that a lot of the time, is the fact that organizations are made up of people, and people need to feel loved, need to feel cared for, they need to feel encouraged, inspired to be the best that they can be. And one of the best ways to do that is to get on their level from an empathy side of things, and then help bring them up to those higher playing fields and things from that perspective, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So one of the other things you talked about was multitasking, right? And I love this idea, because we already joked about this, off air, how we have multiple different workstations and all this other stuff that's going on one desk, right? Talk to me about, the impact that multitasking has inside this tech space, right? I feel like, because for us, it's like you always have something else to work on, and your mind just might go from one thing to the other. And I know for me, I'm always like, I have to kind of like silo and section it off in my brain. Like I have to work on one thing for a certain amount of time, and then I feel safe to move on to the next, right? So
100%.
From your perspective, how do you manage that? How do you manage that workload? How do you, flow quickly between task to task to be able to accomplish the things that you have on your list of things to do? Because I know you always write a list.
Yeah, I do. I have a list. I use Notion which is a web-based application for project management. And I also color code my calendar, and I have notebooks and notepads and all of that to just have a place to capture things. And I send myself emails late at night, like last night, when I need to do something and catch up on it. So yeah, I have all these tips and tricks. And I think that I have not mastered the ability not to multitask. I know that it's been proven that it's not good to do. I think a lot of women do it more often than men. But I have seen very successful men that can do a lot of different things. But for me, Eddie, I kind of think we're similar in the aspect that like certain days or certain times during the day, I know that I'm going to have breaks in the day, and they're going to be for X work. And then for the next day, I'm going to need Y work. And I need a good 1.5 to 2 hours typically throughout the week. I try to do it every day. It depends on meetings, to have what I call deep work, where I can actually execute one thing. Otherwise, if I have too many things that I'm trying to accomplish in one day and they're not say 3 things aligned with one client, for example, or one project, I will feel very disarrayed throughout the rest of my day. So I try to only take on 3 different tasks. I'll write a list, I'll number it, and the rule is 3. If I get to 3 and I'm still feeling super motivated, it's 11 a.m., I'm obviously probably going to do some more tasks that day. But that way, I stay focused, and I'm not trying to do multiple different things. And I think for a lot of people in this space, I actually just had a mentor call this morning, and I could tell that he was taking on too much training. And because of that, it was stalling him to be able to just execute and take a test. And I see a lot of people get into that rut. And I was there too. And you probably have done it as well. We take on so much. And the next thing you know, everything's moving at 5 miles per hour instead of focusing on 2 or 3 things and moving them at 55 to 65 miles per hour, getting those things done, and then picking up the other 1 or 2 things that you had to leave behind for a little while. So it's really about prioritizing. Find your 3 things that are the most important to you. 3 is my rule on everything. And then I focus.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that you brought that up, because I'm going to add 2 things, right? The first thing is this idea of calendar planning, right? Because I would definitely want to highlight that. Calendar planning is so important. And 100% changed my life, right? Even with my background of I play D1 sports and everything else, right? So going from football to film to class, back to weightlifting to it was just, everything was mapped out for you. So you really didn't have time to procrastinate or do anything different, because it was all on the calendar, right? And it's you get done with it, and then you're like, oh, well, I got freedom. I don't have anything to do. And it feels great, but then at the same time, you're like, man, I'm so unproductive. I just did absolutely nothing for these last 5 hours, right? So actually putting things on your calendar and saying hey, I'm going to do this from X time to B time, right? Or X time to Y time, if you want to say it like that, then you have the ability to really be very productive with your time in small pockets, right? The other thing, you brought up within this idea of focus, I think is really cool because I heard this thought, and as you know, I consume content almost as much probably as you do. But I had a conversation, or no, I'm sorry, I was listening to a YouTube video where somebody was talking about focus, right? And they gave this idea of if someone, say you're working on something for 10 hours, you have 10 hours to work on something in a day, right? And let's say you have 10 tasks that you're looking to complete. If you try it and it takes 100 hours to basically complete a task, right? So with those numbers, typically the man said, if you're working on focus and you look at this multitasking type of mindset, and you're trying to do 10 different tasks, so you got 1 hour to dedicate to one task in one day, right? Then it's going to take you 100 days in order to complete all 10 of those tasks, right? Compared to if you take one task, focus all 10 hours that you have in that day on that one task, it's only going to take you 10 days to complete that task, and then you can move on to the next one, right? And I was like, bro, this is like mind-boggling to me, because here I am thinking that I can just do everything under the sun, right? Where it's like, no, if you pull in this idea of focus and really understand that it's there to help you, right? Instead of feeling like, oh, society says it's okay for me to have this thing and this thing and that thing and this thing, right? And I just got to keep working. Well, it's like, yeah, you want to work, but you want to work smarter, not harder, right? And put yourself in a position where you can have the things that you need to really move those tasks forward, right?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I'm going to use that going forward, because that puts it really in perspective, 100 days versus 10 days. I mean, and that's the absolute truth.
Yep.
And that's what a lot of people do, is they find themselves in the 100 days. But you didn't touch on this, and it's something else to think about. When you're 60 days into that 100 days, what about, I'm tired of doing this? And then you've got half finished products now, and they've got like some that are 60 days, some that are 80 days, some that are 70, and you might accomplish one or two out of the 10 in 100 days. And now you've got a whole bunch of unfinished products, which is really, it starts messing with your mind and your motivation and your overall confidence. And that's why it's like prioritization. You start getting things done, confidence builds, momentum builds, and start moving. Yeah.
Let's talk about that, because I know you've talked about that a little bit in a different conversation. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but I'm sure it was one of your weekly live streams that you do. But this idea of confidence, right? And building confidence as a leader, so that you can continue to lead your team with confidence and have the confidence to actually make those people successful in their roles. I'm just curious of how you develop that trait for yourself, that confidence trait. What are some of the activities, the tasks that you do to make sure that you're feeding Jax, right? And you believe in Jax, and Jax, that this Jax can accomplish whatever she sets her mind to.
Yeah, I'm going to share a story with you. That just happened. Yeah, that just happened to me. And this is like total authentic coming right now. But a couple of weeks ago, it's probably 3 weeks ago now, I'm coming into the third week of it, but I was feeling extremely down on myself, like was not having the confidence for the position that I was in, that I am in currently. And I was like, I had that imposter syndrome, and I had that you shouldn't have been hired at this role. You've bit off more than you can chew. Your leadership, like all these things that I knew were lies, and they were coming at me, and I was feeling so insecure. I can't even explain like that pain inside of you of just like, I've made a terrible life decision. So I reached out to one of my bosses. I chatted with her a little bit about it, but I knew that the only person I knew, first off, a lot of these were from my past traumas. And that's where a lot of our insecurities come from, our past traumas. And so I'm like, I know a lot of this is from my past traumas, past cultural work environments, just everything, childhood, all of it. So I recognize that, but it doesn't make it go away instantly. You have to put work in. So the weekend before last, I committed to myself, and I had just listened to a YouTube video recording. It was 9 minutes long, and it was this gentleman talking about how we feel uncomfortable when we're in a space that we don't know, and we're growing and we're maturing, obviously. But when you're actually going through it, you don't think about it like, oh yeah, this being uncomfortable and feeling insecure is just natural. You just start beating yourself up. So I'm like, I got to quit the spiral. So that weekend, I meditated for about an hour and a half, and I wrote down everything that I could think of that was bothering me in the last 2 weeks. And I came up with 15 different things. And then from that, I sat there and went, okay, now I'm going to write the opposite statement to this. I'm going to counter every single one of these. And then after I did that, I then sat there with all the ones that I countered on the right-hand side, and I went, which ones do I have the power to change? Which one of these are not just straight up lies, and which ones do I have the power to change? And there was one thing in there that I had the power to change. And that was my insecurity around my knowledge set within the specific like field or framework. And I knew that I had the power to change that. And I actually have the note like over here on my desk, but I wrote down 3 things. And it included setting aside and dedicating an hour and a half of my time a week to study this specific field, not just all the education and everything, but just this specific field. The other thing that I was going to do is I was going to write an article or I was going to do a YouTube video one time a month of what I learned on that subject. And then the next thing I was going to do is I was going to start reaching out to one of my mentors more often and asking for help. And those were the 3 things that I was going to do. Since I started implementing that, my confidence has gone back up. So the moral of that story is you're going to go through highs and your lows with your confidence. And you have to realize when you go through a low in your confidence, it's typically associated with a trauma, that imposter syndrome sinking in. And it's like, you need to just sit there with your thoughts and think about, why do I feel this way? And give yourself ease and grace. And then really, I have an amazing circle of friends and community in my life. And I have a really tight circle of like 3 people that I reach out to. And when I need them, I reach out to them and I say, hey, this is how I feel. I need some encouragement. And yeah, so I do a lot of different things, but that's just an example of what happened to me in the last few weeks and how I moved through that to kind of get my confidence back up as a leader.
100%. And that's a very impactful exercise to do. It reminded me of, have you read the book Magic of Thinking Big? Have you ever heard that title before?
Magic of Thinking Big.
Yes.
No, I haven't. I'm going to have to read this.
It's an older book. I think it was written probably in the 30s or 40s or something like that, but it's like been remastered, right? But it's a chapter in there that talks about a bank teller. So he basically talks about everybody has a bank teller in their brain, right? And your bank teller is the truest person that there is. If whatever you ask your bank teller, he will 100% give it to you, right? And he talks about this between positive and negative thoughts, though, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, if you go to your bank teller and you go to him and say, like, hey, him or her, right? And you say, hey, Miss Bank Teller, can you tell me about a time that I absolutely was horrible. Tell me about a time that, I did not complete a task. Tell me about a time where I failed miserably, right? Then your bank teller is going to be like, absolutely, Jax. Here's that time. I can give it a date. I can give you the time that this transaction was deposited or whatever else, right? And that's what the subconscious is going to continuously just kind of hold on to inside of your mind. But the same thing is true if you go to your bank teller with positive thoughts, right? If you go to your bank teller and say, hey, tell me about a time where I was in a role that I felt uncomfortable, but I succeeded anyway. Hey, tell me about a time where I felt as though I was inadequate, but it worked out well for me in the end, right? Like, and your bank teller again will be like, hey, well, listen, I remember that time where, I don't know, you were in a dodgeball court and out of nowhere, you thought that you wasn't going to be able to dodge a ball, but you got out of the way. But I know that that's a very small piece of it, right? Or very, what do you call it? Lackadaisical answer, but it's very true. It's like those small little things that start to add to that confidence factor, right? That positivity of loving yourself and believing in yourself, because that's the biggest part, right? The biggest, the thing that you can do as an individual and as a leader is believe in yourself and believe in your direction. Because if you have a strong, resounding belief, then the people around you feel that. And if you don't, if you're kind of like shaky and don't really know where you want to go, you don't have confidence in the direction that you're going, your team also feels that too, right? So it's very important to be able to differentiate between the two and add to that confidence level.
100%. And one more thing to add on to that is sometimes to build confidence, you just got to do it. Like when I launched my YouTube, I was not confident. And the only way I gained my confidence was was here. I'll start over. Good. My phone alarm went off for some reason. I was like, what is happening? I'll start over so we can cut it out. But I want to add one thing to that, though, about sometimes when you're going to get into a situation like building a YouTube or your podcast, you're not going to be, you might not be confident. I know I wasn't confident when I launched my YouTube. And the only way that I became confident was by doing it. And sometimes I work with a lot of people. I mentor a lot of individuals, and they're always afraid to take that first step. And if anybody's listening to this right now and you've been debating on launching your podcast, launching your YouTube, writing that blog article, your confidence will not just suddenly grow overnight. You have to take action and just step out and just do it.
Yep. To sum that up, confidence is in repetition. You get the reps, confidence will come. And by the way, you suck at everything the first time you do it. Just embrace it. It's okay. Don't compare your page 1 to somebody else's page 100, right? When you first get started, you're going to suck. Nobody comes out of the womb just great at everything. Even people with natural talents, right? LeBron didn't come out of the womb knowing how to bounce a basketball, right? It's repetition that growed him into the person that he is today. So, but Jax, I want to say, I know this has been great. I know I can sit here and ask you questions all day long because I'm truly just a fan of your work. I'm a fan of you and a fan of what you do, but I know you have other things to do. So let the people know what's the best way for them to find you. How do they get involved inside of your community so that they can learn more from Jax and understand the value that you bring?
Absolutely, Eddie. And I love your work. Big fan of it. I'm so happy. It was great to be on the show. The easiest way for anybody to be able to reach me, LinkedIn. I'm on there pretty often, just JAX with an S, but you'll probably just find me with Jax, or go to YouTube, Outpost Gray, and the Gray is GRAY, and come to one of our live streams, be part of the community. We live stream every Thursday from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have a welcoming community. So if you're looking to break in or just meet others, stop by and say hello in the chat. It'd be great to see you.
Absolutely. And I will also add to that she's not lying. She responds to every single comment, first of all, which not a lot of creators do, right? They just kind of put it out there and let us do his thing. But Jax is truly dedicated to helping you, right? Which I love. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to have her on the show. It's because she's truly dedicated to helping people. And even for me, myself, who feel as though I've had a background in content creation for years now, I still learn so much, man. Like her show 2 weeks ago, on LinkedIn branding and understanding what that looks like and building your network and things from that perspective. I felt like I was pretty good at networking, but I definitely took a lot of notes from there and applied it to my life the last 2 weeks, even going into DEF CON. And it's got a lot of good traction from it. So if you haven't been a part of the community, you don't know who Jax is, I 100% recommend you become a part of it because your life will be better for it. Okay. So with that, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to tune in to the Leaders in Cyber podcast. I appreciate you all for taking the time to listen and learn. And if you got any questions, thoughts, concerns, all of the notes and things for the show, as well as different ways that you can connect with Jax, is going to be down in the show notes. So I look forward to seeing you guys again on the next one. Deuces.
Bye all.